So I think there's something about how you can give yourself a much more developed deal in terms of learning, openness, relaxing. There's so much to learn in this age and stage of life.
So this is Wild Psychotherapists, John and Roland, and today we're going to talk about maybe a couple of good topics. One is, what does it mean to be wild? Because we've never really explained that in depth. And the other is, maybe we're going to revisit some of the ideas around aging and what that means, if that comes up, and if we can add anything more to our previous podcast, which might be interesting. So you wanted to do wild, Mr. Wildman. So you want to go wild?
Well, that's quite cheeky of you. But well, it did. It has kind of well, it would be okay to say haunted me a little bit. What do we mean by wild? Because it can be misunderstood in a way that's not really related to our meaning of that. So I thought we should both kind of say what we mean by that and build upon that, or deepen into it. So for me, I mean, I think it was you that came up with the term. I've gone along with that, but so maybe that's why I feel a bit haunted by it, because I didn't ask to process that before we did go and put it in there as a
I'm going to
defining.
have to apologize then, John, if I railroaded you.
No, no, no. I'm a big boy now, and I could have stood up for myself and said, "Can we kind of explore that first before we do it?" But I must have felt happy enough with it that it was an interesting one to maybe explore later and just sit with and be with for a while in our way of looking at these issues, because there is a bit of a wild, spontaneous, self-trusting nowness, aliveness to our discussions. But what I mean by wild, or what that means to me, is in some ways it means a relationship with nature, for one thing, and a respect for nature, and also a respect for how individual entities are in nature, even if it's like 100 frogs, every one of those is going to be an individual frog at a certain point in their life cycle, um, going through it in themselves at a very unique rate, and with an inner experience that's well, an inner and outer experience that's very individual. So wild for me means appreciating the the context and the juiciness of the individual. And also, when I think of myself, it means, I've appreciated learning from so many different fields and people in my studies and over time. And I'm still learning. I still make mistakes and have to kind of, learn from my mistakes. But there's something about being up for that, and not
Mhm.
catastrophizing and hoping that my mistakes aren't too serious, but they're important to learn from and to spot. So yeah, wild for me means kind of trusting my own integrity at deeper and deeper levels, and my spontaneity, and also going on integrating, new
Mm, mm.
experience into this wild me that is a creature in nature. Your turn.
Okay, that's lovely. And of course, you sparked a whole lot of different thoughts. Wild to me means two things. Wild is about wilderness. And I'm in Colorado. Behind me is 100 miles of wilderness, basically. I mean, just if I go west, there's mountains and mountains of wilderness. And they have this sense of just being themselves. The wilderness is not messed with. It hasn't been trampled on. It hasn't been manipulated. It hasn't been disturbed by human ingenuity, the way in which we try to make use of everything. Um, so I always think of wilderness, and I think of the way in which wilderness not only is just itself, but it is a full and integrated ecology, that everything works together in a wilderness. Uh, Over the evolutionary cycles, things have actually worked out. How am I going to survive in this place? And of course, we think of it as wild, but those animals and those beings in the wilderness, for them, it's just home, a familiar and comfortable place. So those are some of the kind of feelings about wild, which is that it's got that sense of naturalness. So that's
Mm.
one piece of it.
Hmm.
But the other piece of it is untamed. We would last time we were talking about school, and I was thinking of school as like a taming place. You know, it's kind of like a circus where they take the elephants and they teach the elephants not to be elephants, but to be entertainers. And you could say we're all being unwilded in some ways.
Mm.
And so we've been tamed. We've been put in little cages. Um, and as I get older, and this was really connects to eldering or getting older, it's as though I can get out of those cages. I don't have to believe that those cages are there. I don't have to even be interested in them. I can actually say, so what does it mean for me to just be myself? And maybe that's offensive sometimes. Maybe people don't always like it. Maybe I make mistakes. But there's no, wild things do make mistakes, but the tame ones, they don't make mistakes in the same ways. They are trained to be what they're meant to be by society, by the circus, by the school. Um, and I suppose I don't want to be tame. The people who've made differences to this world, the people I've known and then the people I respect, they've not been very tame.
Mm.
So that's
Yeah.
those are the two things, wilderness and untamed.
Mm. And in relation to psychotherapists, um, I think there's something about whenever people go through trainings, counseling trainings, psychotherapy trainings, they're in some ways tamed to learn that modality. And in order to learn it, well, that model is that you've got to stay within that field and that those boundaries and learn it before you kind of let it loose in the bigger territory of what else you've learned in your life and what you're going to learn next and beyond that. But sometimes I think those processes are too restrictive and not in themselves kind of breathing into the bigger field of nature, the bigger field of other modalities, or even the bigger field of things like philosophy or even beekeeping
Mm,
and the wonderment in other the way other species exist, and fun, the playfulness of fun, like you showed me that book on spotting the queen bee, and all these pictures in a book that where you have to each time spot the bee. That's a wonderful playfulness
yes.
in terms of just even bringing something like that into a learning field instead of it being so kind of encased in a particularity. Wild is unity within diversity.
That's a nice way of putting it. But one of the reasons I chose or fell upon the term wild psychotherapist is that I do consider you wild in the good sense. You're a man of nature. You're a gardener like myself. You're a builder, engaged with materiality or the naturalness of the world, you know? And I think a lot of psychotherapists don't have that. They don't have that sense of being grounded in the real, actual world of nature and things growing and things changing and things, coming into being and dying and the cycles of the year and the different, the different seasons as we go now into fall and winter. It's getting colder and it's like everything is hunkering down. And I think, well, shouldn't human beings be doing that? Isn't that a
Mm,
natural thing to hunker down a little bit, to build our little hearth and to
mm,
feel the hearth and to go inwards and kind of be with the seasons? That to me is
mm,
wild. That's natural.
mm,
No, what we're going to do is just work, 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 turn on the lights, turn on the heating. We are going to stay at this level and we're never going
mm,
to let ourselves kind of drop
mm,
down. But I see that wildness in you and also the fact that it's not that we've forgotten or that the trainings that we've had are not really fundamental and really
Hmm.
useful.
Hmm.
It's just that as you integrate them into who you are, they become part of who you are, and
Hmm.
they're not something imposed on from the outside. If you like,
Hmm.
your nature as a human being shines through the techniques or through the relationship. And that's the other thing I really appreciate about you, which is
Hmm.
John
Well,
is John.
all of those things I could say I appreciate about you too and your
But,
wildness.
and I think that's why we get on so well, which is like we appreciate that
Yeah,
that untamedness, which is like, and I'm going to rethink about this, not what I'm taught. I'm going to think
yeah,
about it again. And then I'm
yeah,
going to think about it again, just as you were saying to me,
yeah.
you're getting new clients, you're studying stuff that you already know, but you're seeing it in a different light, and then
Mm,
you're making it part of who you are and part of your work.
mm, mhm,
And certainly as you get older, there's less time. And so there's less bullshit as far as I'm concerned.
mm.
There's less time to be pretending. I can't pretend anymore.
Well, there's something of what you said there makes me think of welcoming challenge as well, welcoming difference, welcoming the uniqueness of what's coming. We're on a collision course with unique occasions, unique people, and within every meeting, it's a unique occasion. I remember there was a Buddhist teacher of mine who had us say a prayer, grant your blessing that difficulties may be brought to my path.
Oh,
And I felt, well, I liked it in terms of it changed his psychology instead of being afraid of difficulties. But it's in itself, it's got a wildness in it to do with, not hiding in a kind of complacency or in a set of knowing, too much knowing, and it's opening to the real uniqueness of everything is a unique occasion coming our way, and we cannot assume it's just like any previous experience we've had or case we've had or individual we've seen. We have to kind of allow ourselves to be affected in a way that's now and real in relation to ourselves at this juncture, but that person and also what the bigger
mm.
world, environmental, human, and everything else context is.
And that, in some sense, is nature, isn't it?
Mm,
Nature is always interconnected and, in some sense, always feeding back on itself and feeding back on its environment. And,
mhm,
there's a tremendous complexity when we
mhm,
just look at anything in nature, which we often don't recognize because we're not looking at that complexity.
mhm,
But a gardener. Gardening to me is a fascinating thing because it's an analogy for everything, because it's
mhm,
so complicated and you
mhm,
fail so often, and there's no way to control it completely. It's got these
mhm,
unforeseen factors always in it, and you can't make things grow. They either grow or they don't grow. You can
mhm,
create opportunities and situations where it's more likely that they grow, but you have no control of that process of the
mhm,
growing.
mhm,
Uh, and so to me, that gives me a kind of model of like, okay, that's maybe how I need to relate
mhm,
to life,
mhm.
more like a gardener than a mechanic. And I think those are the two things. You've got a lot of people who are very mechanical in the way they approach their lives.
Mhm. And that's sad, but the whole algorithm process is increasing that likelihood. It's narrowing everybody's field and it's
Mm,
taking away the wild, and putting much more of the same, repetition compulsion into what people are experiencing and
mm.
feeding also some tendencies in them that are kind of pretty dodgy in terms of having obsessions that are kind of locked into a kind of fixity instead of really truly breathing into the wild and back in again. I like the idea that AI is a baby. It's not a wise old AI. It's a baby AI. Yeah, and therefore it needs parenting. It needs watched. It needs grown up. It needs to be checked. It needs its nappy changed on a regular basis. It's a baby, and
Right.
we have to not trust it like it's some amazing adult
That
grown
is
up.
a great attitude. and maybe it should have that written on the top. This is baby ChatGPT. This is
Yeah.
not grown up.
Yeah.
Don't always listen to what the baby says.
And don't give it too much power
Right.
because baby needs contained and needs to play also and not just be given tasks to do. Well, I think baby AI is a good example. It's not, it's going to age. It'll take a long time for it to be truly grown up. And I suppose that's true, for all of us if we are leaning into the kind of age, whatever age we are, and trying to live as fully in that age and those conditions, then there's a lot of challenge in that. Every one of us, I see so many people walking around these days. I had a little bit of a knee problem, but I now notice how many people are walking with sticks or how many people are limping. Or I can see that I'm part of that group now that are in the sort of knee and hip department
Right.
of aging and some of the accompanying losses and grief. And it's like, how do you stay wild through that? How do you stay, like, how do you welcome that as a natural process of degeneration and not just fall into a kind of collapse in the face of that or a less vital approach to living. So yeah, I feel there's a real challenge in aging to do with trying to stay vibrant and trying to stay
Hmm.
in your vitality.
But I think when we're talking about the wildness, one of the few benefits, I don't know if you have, of aging is that you're no longer as self-conscious or as concerned with how you look, how you come across, your impact on other people. That becomes secondary to the sense of being yourself. Um, and as we know, there's a real dilemma about the fact that we're taught to be self-conscious, and we certainly go through those periods in adolescence of being totally self-conscious.
Mm.
But self-conscious to me is almost antipathetic, opposite, not quite the opposite, but definitely doesn't go with self-awareness.
No.
So self-awareness has to grow beyond our self-consciousness, which is that I am always concerned with how I appear, or I am concerned with what I say, or I am concerned whether I'm doing the right thing or not, because those things become less important as you age, at least to me.
Yeah, but there's something about dignity and integrity that I want to be treated with dignity and integrity as an older person. There's something I think about not surrendering to not caring. And I'm not saying you're saying not to care, but I like the concept of transcend and include, that I'm not trying to get rid of all those, previous tendencies of being anxious or frightened or worried or how I look or whatever. But I want to have, be able to keep on, well, as I try to do now, transcend and include, and that means it's a relational process. I can witness more, awareness, you could say, more of the insecurities or whatever that arise. I can see the age and stage and the history that they relate to, and I can have a choice. I can be different than that and now. And in some ways, my now can even be richer because I see that in an empathic way in my own history instead of being afraid of it.
One of the things that I think which is very, very neglected is, however you want to call it, psychotherapy with older people. And I'm talking about people over 65. What do we know about helping people over the age of 65? Where is the research? Where is the approach which is appropriate? We know a lot about working with younger people,
Mhm.
20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, maybe, but we neglect working with people who are older. I've worked with quite a lot of older people. Have you? You
Likewise.
probably have, yeah. And it's actually different because it's kind of what you were talking about. And I would frame it a little different, which is that you're not going to get rid of anything at this time. You've got it. This is the package you got. You've
Mm,
got your whole life, you've got all of the skills and abilities, and you've got all of the difficulties. Your
mm,
shadow hopefully is a little lighter, but it's never going to go away.
mm,
And the things that trigger you, you will still feel those things.
mm,
You will still experience them. They're not going to just suddenly disappear. So some of the things you can work beyond, like transcend. Some of the things you actually just have to manage.
mm,
Just have to manage and accommodate to them. You can't actually do much more than that. And the question is, how do I manage the fact that my body aches? Okay, there's all sorts of physical things.
mm,
How do I manage the fact that I get despondent about the state of the world? Because that's a realistic thing. How do I manage the fact that when I wake up and I'm feeling very low in energy, I can't muster the consciousness to do some of the things I'd like to do? It's not that I'm
mm,
depressed, it's almost that the life energy is now a little more depleted and we can't engage quite as strongly. But
mm,
these are all issues of aging, which I think we need to be thinking about and addressing.
mm. Yeah, I agree. I think it's really interesting when I experience some of the borderline personality disorder or ADHD or ADD or a kind of depressive fixity, that when we experience these things in that life stage, they have a very different kind of context in body, in embodiment. And also, when people are experiencing those things, the journey that that body has gone through, to get to that point, that there are many unique features to being over 65. How your body has suffered and worn through those ages and stages in a way that leaves you, in some ways, more physically affected, or that you're still trying to kind of give yourself some buoyancy through patterns of exercise or yoga or walking, climbing, playing, that there's unique ways that people resource themselves. And it's very individual. And there's a different kind of anxiety also that comes in. And it's not the same anxiety as I experienced historically. And we have to kind of wonder if that's true for everybody. What kind of feelings, how are feelings affected by how you're feeling them now when you're this close to the cutoff point?
Which is, yes, we experience things very differently. But
Yeah.
that's because, in some sense, what I was talking about, we've got all of these experiences. Each experience, new experience, gets located within
Mm,
this whole field of all our previous experiences.
hmm
And that's one of the reasons I think that actually, as you age, time goes very fast. It seems to speed up pretty exponentially as you get older. If you're a newborn, one day is a whole lifetime. Then, if you're a month old, a week is one quarter of your whole life. But if I said to you now, what percentage of your life is a week now, John? What percentage is it of mine? It's a very small percentage. It
mm,
goes like zip,
mm, mm.
and I
Some-
think, where did
Somehow,
those days
yeah.
go? Where did that time go? There's this momentum of it going. So our
Mhm.
experience of time is quite different. Do you remember when you were a child, those endless days in the summer?
Yeah. Yeah. Do you remember, like reading a book all day long?
Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Like it's like when I start reading a book, I sometimes think of that and I think, how did I ever do that?
Right. And you
That
get
that was
immersed, you're completely taken into that world.
yeah.
But yes,
Huh.
it's very different as we're getting older. And certainly, I don't know if you feel it, but that because time is shorter, I have to use it more effectively,
hmm
but
hmm
I have less energy. But so what
hmm
I do has to have value for me, first of all,
hmm
and then for other people.
hmm There's something about how do we resource ourselves for that to happen for other people? you know, that for that to be included.
Mm.
Our relationship with our inner world in that process of being civilized and educated and complying, I think it becomes for a lot of people, a place that's more scary or a place you don't want to hang out. And so your relationship with your interiority as you get older, there's such a scarcity of relationship with our interiority and normal life patterns and upbringing. And I think people are, on the whole, not very aware or have much of a relationship with their inner world. But
Mhm.
when we expand that deliberately, which I love to do, really just through taking turns with somebody, and I find that if we expand our relationship with interiority, it gives us more of a confidence in relation to the outer world
Mm.
and a greater trust of our own spontaneity, our own deep integrity, because especially if we do it with somebody else, and I think it's to do with, in some ways, mummy baby. That when you watch a mummy and mummy, there's so much turn taking going on between the two of them. But when you close your eyes, when I close my eyes, and we say we'll kind of free associate in terms of history or memory around a word like buttercup, and we just see what arises in consciousness. It's like a poultice. I know it's to draw out.
It would be more like it. I don't know if you ever have had castor oil packs. Have you ever used those? Come from
Yeah,
Edgar Casey. We could talk all about castor oil packs. But yeah, you heat up, you have a woolen pan and you fill it full of castor oil and
yeah,
you put it on your body and you put a
yeah,
hot water bottle on top of it and it is just the best.
yeah. Now tell me that. Say that same thing again with your eyes closed.
Okay, so I can actually have the experience of having my castor oil pack, which is a lovely
Yeah,
woolen thing, pouring on the oil like this, putting it
yeah,
on my tummy, then you put a
yeah,
plastic over it, and then you put a lovely hot water bottle on it. And if you got a bad tummy, it's just really soothing.
yeah. Nice. I wonder if we should make a much bigger tendency, like out of wearing blindfolds, really good ones that you can't see through, and having to talk to people a lot more, not go shopping, but have to talk to people a lot more in that kind of way that your interiority is part of part of what's going on.
That's a
Yeah,
fascinating idea, which is that what you're doing is talking from your actual experience, your lived
yeah,
experience, and you're describing it rather than telling it.
yeah,
And as you describe it, it has a resonance with some
yeah.
other experience.
But think of when we were training or even in education, children, if they were introduced to that in classes, they had periods of the day when they all had blindfolds on, and they could kind of experiment, like, okay, who's here, and to relate to each other, in a way that's totally different when you can't see them.
It makes me think what you're discussing was what I think of and sometimes communicate to my clients about what I call the inner landscape.
Nice term.
The inner landscape is a place you want to live. If it's beautiful, well arranged, if it's got this welcoming quality, that
Mhm.
then to close your eyes is to go into a beautiful place. But for most people, their inner landscape is rather bleak, or
Or
sometimes it's really
scary, or
scary.
scary. Yeah.
Sometimes it's devastated.
Mm.
And so for them to close their eyes, it's really not an enjoyable experience. So, you could, one of the ways I think about therapy is cultivating your inner landscape. It's getting that in there with a big spade and digging it up sometimes if it needs to be, and
Mm.
planting some lovely trees and shrubs and flowers and vegetables
Mm.
and growing something, and then
Mhm.
feeling like, oh, I just really like to be in here. It's such a
Yeah.
lovely place.
Mm. And the group experience of that, and somebody holding that makes that inner landscape gardening, exchanging, multiplicity of experiencing together, rich and safe. And safety within that is probably quite essential to feel safe,
So if
especially in a group.
I had this idea, there should be more groups for older people.
Hmm.
What if you did an inner landscaping group where
Hmm.
you actually just got people to sit around and then, okay, we're going to explore this bit of our landscape. We're going to go,
Yeah.
oh, let's go up this mountain. Or how
Hmm.
about this memory? These are all
Hmm.
parts of your inner landscape, kind of cultivated, particularly because as you get older, you're going to have to go inwards.
Hmm.
And if you're not comfortable in that place, you're going to have a very uncomfortable old age, basically.
Hmm.
Well, and maybe even your dying process. Death, I never think
Yeah.
is of the problem, but the dying process, you can see people struggle with that. And when they find that interiority, when they're being forced into that place, because it can be like semi-coma for some people, or it can be
Hmm.
just a reverie, um, they get frightened.
Yeah.
And it's like, that shouldn't be frightening. That should be a
Hmm.
lovely place to go.
In one way or another, when you have a kind of rich relationship with your interiority, in some ways you don't want to, you know, die too quickly. You might want to be sedated in a nice way, in a, a way that's kind of slow and that can, if you could establish those conditions, slow and interesting.
Are we coming close to the end here for this talk? This is a lovely talk.
Yeah, it is. I think we're kind of getting older in it somehow. We're maturing. We're
We're
maturing.
maturing into it, yeah. And then we do need to talk about dying, the dying process. You've worked with people who are dying, I'm sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, and I worked in hospice and I've trained people in hospice and I've worked with quite a lot of dying and certainly very interested in that whole process, which is a pretty taboo subject in many
Hmm.
societies. And particularly America doesn't do a good job. And, I think I've talked about my father's death in Ireland, where the Irish have really got a wonderful relationship with funerals. They are such fun. Um,
Yeah, no, globalization is starting to kind of deteriorate that everywhere.
yeah,
It's
it's the
sad.
industrialization,
Yeah,
turning it into an
yeah,
industrial process, really. And
yeah.
that's not how it's ever been in the past. So
No.
we probably need to talk about that. But
So let's take a turn to see what we're left with from today,
okay.
Roland. You want to go first, or do you want me to?
Well, I'm looking out the window and I'm looking at the top of this beautiful tree, which is golden yellow. To me, it's like going into the fall and it's beautiful and it somehow reminds me of aging. That
Hmm.
we're in the fall of our lives and there is a certain kind of mature wonder about the fall, the autumn, of how things are moving into another process. As I say, it's beautiful. We're not recognizing and we're not looking at the incredible richness and beauty of it.
Hmm.
Everybody will go out and look at particularly in New England, they go out and look at the trees, but they're not thinking, oh, so this is what it's like to come towards the winter of your life.
Hmm.
And very close friend of mine, uh, Reb Zalman Schachter Shalomi, he wrote a book called The Autumn of Your Life. And then I think he
Hmm.
wrote a book called Going into Winter too, or he wrote with
Hmm.
somebody
Nice.
about getting really towards the end of his life. That's what I'm left with, which is this is great. I know most people would say, I just love being this age. I
Hmm.
think it's so wonderful and it's so interesting. And I'm
Hmm.
lucky because I'm healthy and I've got, my full cognitive capacity. But it is really about being yourself
Hmm.
and not fighting with the aging process and not trying to live forever or any of those things, but just kind of like, this is a beautiful time.
Hmm. Nice. Yeah. I think I'm left with maybe where I'm at the moment, enjoying almost like new learning at this age, and how much from this time in my life, I'm much more, I don't know, my brain's working differently in a way that's inquisitive and integrative. I'm integrating things differently now. And maybe it's like grandparents can sometimes give their grandkids a much better deal than they did their own kids. So I think there's something about how you can give yourself a much more developed deal in terms of learning, openness, relaxing. There's so much to learn in this age and stage of life.
Very nice, John. Hi, I'm Roland of the Wild Psychotherapists. I'd like to thank all our viewers and listeners for spreading the words about our podcasts and all your fascinating comments. Thank you. Please let us know if there are particular subjects you'd like us to discuss. We're very open to your suggestions. We've talked a lot about how the lived experience of aging is sorely neglected, but that also goes for the period of adolescence in our lives. My book, Surface and Depth, is a memoir of my own very unusual teenage years growing up in Wales and Ireland. And like most memoirs, after each chapter, I reflect on the deeper psychological forces and dynamics happening just below the surface of my experience. You can find Surface and Depth on Amazon.